Welcome to the 700 Club. Hamas has launched unprecedented rocket attacks against Israel's Iron Dome has responded, lighting up the sky over Tel Aviv.
That's right. And the leader of Hamas is now calling for Israeli Arabs to rise up, sparking what some are calling a civil war. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing the terrorists will pay a heavy price. Chris Mitchell brings us this report on the ground in Jerusalem.
In the heaviest fighting since 2014, Hamas and other terror groups fired more than 1,000 rockets within a day and a half. It's the largest ever rocket fire on South and Central Israel. The rocket salvos and the interceptions by the Iron Dome anti-missile system lit up the night sky over Tel Aviv in what looked like a Star Wars battle. Israel suspended flights from David Ben-Gurion Airport for an hour when rocket fire hit nearby. During the day, the skies over southern Israel witnessed the aerial battle between the rockets and the Iron Dome. The Israel Defense Force says the Iron Dome has shot down more than 90% of the rockets. 5 Israelis have been killed by the rocket fire.
All of these rockets were fired from densely populated civilian areas in Gaza by terrorists, blatantly disregarding human life and security of Palestinians and aiming to kill Israeli civilians. We are responding to Hamas's aggression by firing rockets at Israel, at our capital, and by forcing more than 1.5 million Israeli civilians into shelter.
In a campaign called Guardians of the Wall, Israel launched more than 500 surgical airstrikes to stop the rocket fire. Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz said they have many more targets to hit. 35 Palestinians have died in the attacks. The IDF says most of those were involved in the rocket attacks. The IDF has also killed several leaders of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They toppled this building housing Hamas offices. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Israel's security cabinet.
The conclusion of the meeting is to increase even more the force of the strikes and also the rate of the strikes. Hamas will now receive blows that it did not expect, and I know that this also involves patience and a certain sacrifice on your part, citizens of Israel.
On Tuesday, the U.S. State Department weighed in on the fighting.
Israel has the right to defend itself and to respond to rocket attacks. The Palestinian people also have the right to safety and security, just as Israelis do.
And the worst riots in more than 20 years rocked the Israeli town of Lod when Israeli Arabs rioted, burned synagogues, and set fire to dozens of cars. Israel declared a state of emergency, and the mayor called it a civil war. Inside Gaza, Hamas vowed to keep fighting, and its leader, Ismail Haniyeh, said it shifted the balance of power. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad posted this video thanking Iran for the new Badr 3 missile. It's another sign Iran is directly involved in this conflict. Last year, Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei admitted for the first time his country was supplying weapons. He said Iran realized Palestinian fighters' only problem was a lack of access to weapons. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Please be careful of what you're reading in the news and this attempt to try to have some kind of balance. And I'm just astounded that the State Department would say the Palestinian people have a right to safety and security. Yes, they do. But at the same time, they've elected a terrorist group to lead them. Hamas is designated by that same same State Department as a terrorist group. So you have to be consistent with this. If they're a terrorist group, I say they are not entitled to safety and security. And if they want to fire rockets at a civilian population, well, then that needs to stop by any means necessary. Keep this in mind. Hamas is a terrorist group. They don't get safety. They don't get security. And it's amazing the doublespeak that's coming. It's coming from members of Congress. It's coming from the State Department. It's also coming from the International Courts of Justice, where they're trying to claim already that Israel has engaged in war crimes in their response to these terrorist acts. We can't stand for this. Israel has a right to be secure. The citizens of Israel, Arab and Jew and Christian, have a right to security and safety. and freedom from terror attacks. That's exactly what this is. It's been named at the highest levels of our government as terrorism, and we need to stay consistent in our analysis. Well, in other news, are we getting ready for more panic at the pump? Gas lines are forming up and down the East Coast, and 4 governors have declared a state of emergency. So how long will it be before the fuel starts flowing again? John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That is right, Gordon. Fuel shortages are hitting the East Coast with gas stations running dry due to that cyber attack pipeline shutdown. Even though some fuel is starting to move again, fuel capacity could be days away. CBN Charlene Aaron has the story.
Drivers in several states report waiting in long lines for gas as officials work to repair the Colonial Pipeline, which has been shut down for 5 days. While some stations run dry, officials in Washington highlight the threat of such cyber attacks. From the Carolinas to Florida, long lines wrapping around gas stations as drivers seek to fill up at the pump.
I have been at around 3 gas stations, and it's the same way. In some stations I could not get the gas at all, so I have been waiting. I don't know if I can get the gas here.
I am almost on empty, and I do childcare for my grandkids, and I'm going to need gas to get back to them in a couple days.
Frustration mounting as gas outages reported along the East Coast. According to Gas Buddy, more than 1,000 gas stations in at least 7 states, from Florida to Virginia, are running out of gas. 4 governors declaring states of emergency. Officials warning against panic buying, which threatens supplies.
Much as there was no cause for, say, hoarding toilet paper at the beginning of the pandemic, there should be no cause for hoarding gasoline.
Across the Southeast, demand for gas is up 40%. Nationwide, prices at the pump inching up too, hitting $2.98 a gallon, the highest in 6 years, and it's expected to rise higher. This after a gang of Russian hackers called DarkSide struck a major pipeline for ransom. The Colonial Pipeline is 5,500 miles long, providing 45% of gas, including airline fuel to the east coast of the country. In a congressional hearing Tuesday, members of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee highlighted the dangers of such an attack.
This is potentially the most substantial and damaging attack on U.S. critical infrastructure ever.
Colonial hopes to restore the pipeline network before the end of the week, but says it will take days to get it back up and running. The shortages come as AAA expects some 37 million Americans to travel this Memorial Day weekend, up 60% from last year. And experts say if the Colonial Pipeline is restored soon, gas should be flowing in time for the holiday. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
All right, thanks, Charlene. Well, in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, the family of a man shot to death by sheriff's deputies 3 weeks ago viewed more body cam footage of the incident Tuesday. Andrew Brown's family watched 20 minutes from 6 different cameras allowed by court order. One included police dashboard cam footage. The family's attorney says the video does not bear out the district attorney's claim that Brown struck the deputies with his car before they opened fire.
We were able to see Mr. Brown sitting in his vehicle as he was ambushed. We did not see any actions on Mr. Brown's part where he made contact with them or tried to go in their direction.
The video has not been released to the public. 3 of the deputies who fired their weapons remain on administrative leave, but 4 others who were at the scene are now back on duty. The FBI is pursuing a civil rights investigation into the killing. Well, it's decision day here in Washington as Republicans in the House of Representatives are expected to remove Liz Cheney from her leadership position today. As of this morning, Cheney is the number 3 Republican in the House. She has repeatedly criticized former President Donald Trump's claims that the election was stolen. House Leader Kevin McCarthy and others say the focus should be on next year's congressional elections, seizing their opportunity to potentially retake the House. Trump and McCarthy have endorsed New York Representative Elise Stefanik to replace Cheney. However, some conservatives challenged Stefanik's bid because of her moderate voting record. Well, Senate Democrats and Republicans sparred over a controversial election reform bill in a 9-hour debate Tuesday. Though members of the Senate Rules Committee deadlocked 9-9 to advance the legislation, Democrats can still maneuver to send the bill to the floor for a full vote. Democrats maintain the bill is necessary to protect voting rights as some states tighten up their rules, but Republicans say it's nothing more than a power grab. The controversial legislation sparking heated debate, even bringing both the Senate majority and minority leaders to the hearings.
Here in the 21st century, we are witnessing an attempt at the greatest contraction of voting rights since the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of Jim Crow. The bill before this committee has a very simple premise: make it easier, not harder, to vote.
This legislation will let Washington Democrats dictate the terms of their own re-election races by rewriting all 50 states' election laws. Democrats have a narrow majority in the House and a 50-50 Senate, but they want to make themselves the Board of Elections for every county and state in America.
The bill, which already passed in the House, does away with voter ID, requires states to offer mail-in ballots, and reorganizes the Federal Election Commission to favor the majority party. It also calls for independent commissions to replace state control in redrawing congressional districts. And Gordon, even if Democrats can get around the filibuster, some don't fully support the bill, and it might not have enough votes to pass.
Well, it shouldn't pass. Anytime you get rid of voter ID regulations, it's an open invitation for vote fraud. It's not an equal access issue. Everybody can get an ID. Everyone should be able to prove that they live in the district where they're voting and that they have a right to vote. That's all part of election integrity. It's obscure law, but the Federal Election Commission, since its establishment after Watergate, was designed to be equal so that both parties have an equal voice. And that if it's equal, then in questionable cases, the commission will come to a tie and the issue won't move ahead. If you rearrange that so the majority now controls the Federal Election Commission, then you'll have partisanship in these reviews, and the majority party can use the Federal Election Commission to go after the minority. That is an unacceptable outcome. That leads to majorities that stay in power forever because they will then just say, well, under the Federal Election Commission, you violated the law, and therefore you don't get to run. These are big issues, and we all need to pay attention to them. Our elections need to have integrity to them, particularly after what happened last November. We can't have questions moving forward. We need to do everything in our power to remove those questions so that we can count the votes accurately. We know exactly who voted, and we have election integrity that can announce the results the night of the election or perhaps next day, but not weeks on end waiting for recounts and all these other things. Let's have that on a bipartisan basis. What we're currently seeing is the Democrats in a power play. That needs to stop.